We're going back to the Stone Age tonight, when clothes were made of whatever you didn't starve to death, trying to catch, and much more. Before you settle in, please like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. You can also let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always interesting to see who is watching from around the world. Now, turn down the light and maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's go into a world where everything is either hungry or on fire, sometimes all at once. You've only made it through the night because nothing hungry stumbled into your cave while you were snoring like a mammoth with sinus issues. The good news is that you're alive, but the bad news is that you're in the Stone Age. Your bed is a rock, not a firm mattress. It's a literal slab of nature that hasn't done anything to support your spine. If you're lucky, there's a layer of fur between you and hypothermia, likely from some unfortunate animal you didn't kill but are now wearing like you did. It still smells like regret. You try to sit up, but your joints crack loud enough to wake a saber-toothed tiger, or, at the very least, get a disapproving grunt from the person squatting next to you, sharpening a bone knife. Not endearing, there is no fire, only the smoldering remnants of what may have been warmth, now reduced to smoke, ash, and shame outside, and it is freezing outdoors. I can see my breath, and perhaps even a portion of my soul is cold. Hasn't even risen yet. You, on the other hand, look like someone dropped a confused poet into a survival contest. You have no idea what you're supposed to do, and honestly, neither does anyone else. But they're better at acting like you stretch bad idea. Your shoulder clicks, your back spasms, and your hips issue a formal protest. There is no breakfast waiting. There is no gentle conversation. There is no coffee. This is probably because the tribe is already awake and moving around as though this is normal. Like waking up before dawn to gather rocks and avoid dying is a completely reasonable lifestyle. You wake up feeling hungry, not just I could eat. Hungry, but the kind of hunger where your stomach starts talking to itself, and none of them are friendly. And you look around expecting maybe a handful of berries, or even a sad strip of dried meat. But there is nothing. It's the cold realization that if you don't start doing anything useful right away, you might be left behind, or worse, eaten after you die for convenience. In the Stone Age, breakfast is not a daily ritual. Rather, it is a hypothetical hope and a whispered prayer to an uncaring sky god who may or may not be a large rock with a face someone carved enduring a fever dream. If you want to eat, you have to earn it, which means digging, scraping, scavenging, or running after something faster than you and hoping it's dumber The spoiler is that not everything you want to eat has legs or thorns, and in both situations, it uses them against you. You watch as a wiry man on a route that appears to be something you wouldn't even touch, and he offers you a piece of it. It tastes like wet wood that lost a bet, but it fills your mouth. And more importantly, it doesn't actively try to kill you. Someone else holds up a dead bird as if they've just found gold. It's about the size of your hand, mostly made up of feathers and nerves, and they begin plucking it with the efficiency of someone who's done this a lot. This is comforting until you realize that they're keeping the entire thing. Apparently, catching food means you get to eat it. It turns out that every fruit looks either suspiciously bright or aggressively bland. You pluck something that vaguely resembles a plum, but a woman slaps it out of your hand before you can taste it. She doesn't say anything. She just gives you a look that says, "I've seen people drop dead faster than that." You decide to pretend that chewing on a bit of old root is sufficient, but your stomach isn't tricked and starts plotting your treachery. You want to be helpful, which is cute, but you're fasting forever if you're not careful. The tribe is already busy. While one person sharpens a flint blade, another weaves sinew into what may be a net, a trap, or simply a clever method to make. You feel incompetent. You pick up a rock and stare at it. It glances back, congratulating you on your link with a rock. Tools are not ornaments here. They're, unless you've spent years figuring out which stone breaks into blades and which one just breaks your thumb. You're about as useful as a damp leaf. A man smacks two stones together and produces a razor-sharp edge in 3 swings. You try the same thing, but the rock splits unevenly and flings a shard directly into your face. You're bleeding now, but hey, you've successfully recreated the experience of early surgery. When you're bad at something, you sit down with your 2 rocks and try a new strategy until inspiration strikes. But what strikes is another flake of stone right into your lap. You pretend it was intentional, but no one buys it. Eventually, someone takes pity and hands you a half-finished scraper, not out of kindness, but because watching you fail is slowing everyone down. You nod gratefully, then hold it the wrong way, shake your head, and go back to work. It's getting colder again, which is impressive considering you didn't think colder was still an option. You have stiff fingers. Your feet are beginning to feel like someone else's problem, and your nose has ceased providing temperature updates. You decide it's time to start a fire, because, after all, how difficult can it be? You've seen it done in drawings and dreams. So step 1 is to gather dry wood, but you can't find it. You choose the least suspect bundle and hope for the best, because everything is wet, obstinate, and coated in anything that might or might not be alive. Step 2. Friction. You rub sticks together, but nothing happens. You rub even harder, but nothing changes. Eventually, you create heat, smoke, and more smoke, which is just enough to burn your eyes and give you false hope. Then, without saying goodbye, you look over and see that one of the elders has a fire going already. There is no ceremony or drama, just a small, perfect flame nestled in a pile of dry moss, as if it was born there. You look back at your pile, and it appears to have been cursed. Eventually, someone notices, and they silently take your kindling, rearrange it like a board god, strike 2 rocks together with a flint edge, sparks, smoke flame, and, without a word, they give it to you, and leave before you can say thank you or teach me your dark magic. You look at the fire that is currently burning in your pile and act as though it was your idea. Nobody thinks that your fire is the only thing that has kept predators from dragging you into the darkness. But it's never easy. Every fire is a struggle. And after losing 5 in a row, you're so thirsty that you're considering biting bark or licking moss to feel moist. Your mouth feels like sandpaper. Luckily, there's a stream nearby. You stumble toward it like a man possessed. Finally, something easy. You kneel, cup your hands, and scoop up a glorious handful of crystal clear water. You drink, and then you pause. That water had a taste, not a flavor. A message, it whispered, something metallic and vaguely threatening. A few seconds later, your stomach replies with a gurgle that sounds like it's filing a complaint. Here's the thing, in the stone. Age water is not clean or filtered. It's not lovingly piped from snowmelt through a mountain spring. It's a wild, communal soup animals drink. From it, people bathe in it. Sometimes things die in it. Sometimes people drink it after things die in it. There is no quality control. There is only risk. You look around for signs. Any sign that this water is safe. No one else is drinking. That might be a clue. One of the elders is boiling something over a fire. Smart, you didn't do that. You drank straight from the source, like it owed you something. A small child walks by and hands you a hollowed out gourd of water. Its warm smells faintly like dirt and still looks safer than whatever just settled in your lower intestine. But there's no other option. You live in a culture that hasn't developed plumbing, filtration, or even reliable guidance on which puddles won't ruin your week. Water is all around you, but it's handily weaponized. You hear a half-spoken narrative about a man who drank from the wrong bend in the river and didn't reach the place of grieving. You gently nod in an attempt to memorize the story, while also acting as though you didn't do the exact same thing. Now, you have to wait. Will you drink more water and feel better, or will you spend the next 12 hours regretting every choice you made with your tongue? You are given a spear that is hefty, uneven, likely something with tusks after you have made the brave decision to join the hunt. The others calmly inspect their equipment as if they were simply heading out to get groceries. If the groceries actively attempted to stab you, you follow the group into the woods where the air is too quiet, leading you to believe that everything is fine. However, the silence indicates that every animal within a mile is aware of your presence and has decided it does not want to be there. Eventually, someone spots something, a huge, seemingly unfriendly wild boar. For fun, you bench press logs. Lift your spear. Your hand is trembling. Your confidence is even more trembling. The boar looks up. You freeze. It doesn't charge. And you run. That's your plan. You run through the forest, stumble over a path, and eat dirt, not just metaphorical dirt, real dirt that tastes as good as your performance. The real hunters are moving precisely behind you. As the ball falls, the tribe cheers and you remain on the ground, reconsidering your entire identity. One darts left, another flanks from the side, spears fly. The animal is butchered with stone knives and practiced hands, and you are given a strip of raw meat to chew like someone trying to understand how flavor works. It is chewy. They drag the carcass back to camp with 4 people and a lot of grunting, and you limp behind them, trying to look like you helped and didn't, back at the fire. This was intended to be your moment of heroism, but in reality, hunting in the Stone Age is not cinematic. It's grueling, hazardous, and most of the time, you don't get to do it. It was supposed to be a little warm and strangely sentimental. You've learned a valuable lesson today. You are not the top predator. Rather, you are the person who obstructs the hunting party and nearly dies from being crushed to death by an enlarged pork missile. You decide to try something new. Safer plants. How challenging might foraging be? You are essentially a herbalist who goes out with a little woven pouch and unending hope after seeing leaves and even touching a mushroom. You discovered something that appears promising, a berry bush. The berries are tiny, glossy, and brightly colored, which may be a sign of nourishment or a clear biological warning. Historically, these 2 things have killed individuals in a matter of minutes. You're about to put one in your mouth when you grab one. Siren. You're supposed to know what's edible and what's deadly. And if you don't, the tribe gets 1 story richer. You move on, dig up a few tubers, and try to act like you know what you're doing. You even sniff a mushroom with scholarly curiosity before throwing it. A woman nearby swats your hand away as if she's saving your life, which, to be fair, she is. A man shows you what appears to be a shriveled brown carrot, and you nod back as if you knew this plant personally. You chew a piece, and it tastes like soil and regret, but you're still alive, which is success. This reminds you that fungi in this world are less side dishes and more hallucinations into the void before dying under a fern. In actuality, plants are the true guardians of survival. They wait for you to make a mistake without running or biting. Even the edible leaves are effective. Certain roots must be boiled, while other leaves must be dried. If you forget to roast certain seeds first, they will kill you. There are no shortcuts, only symptoms. Let's speak about what you're wearing, or rather, what you've been wrapped in like a poorly packed meatloaf. By the time you get back to camp, you've collected to somewhat safe tubers, a few edible flowers, and a newfound appreciation for herbal expertise that you absolutely do not possess. Your clothing is made of animal hides that were scraped clean. With a rock, dried over smoke, and stitched together using a method that can only be characterized as practical but slightly offensive. It doesn't fit, it doesn't breathe, and it smells like something that was just alive and could still be there. Are only openings for your arms to leave. There are no sleeves. The clothing itself is loose in some areas and stiff in others, and it was mostly designed by someone whose sole fashion objective was "don't die today." It's a poor idea to try to alter it by pulling at the edges. The dried sinew seams react by penetrating your skin more deeply, causing you to chafe. Congratulations! In the Stone Age, clothing had negative repercussions. In the vicinity, a woman is chewing a fresh hide to soften it. Yeah, this is typical. You try to look dignified, but it's difficult because your fur tunic flaps strangely when you move. You wonder for a moment how desperate someone had to be to find that teeth were a useful tailoring tool. Your boots are two mismatched scraps tied together with strips of gut, and your inner thighs are now at war with your outer thighs over territory. Then there's the temperature. Somehow your hide outfit manages to be too warm and too cold at the same time. The fur traps heat around your torso, making you sweat, while your limbs dangle freely in the wind like sacrifices to the frost gods. And don't even ask about rain. Hides get wet, hides get heavy, and suddenly you're walking around wrapped in a soggy animal sponge that slowly reanimates as it drips down your back. Meanwhile, the rest of the tribe looks perfectly at ease in there. Handmade gear, their clothes move with them. Yours moves against you, like it resents being worn by someone this incompetent. You think the tribe likes you. That's adorable. You've been here a day, maybe two. You haven't actively endangered anyone yet. And you're trying your best, which in Stone Age terms, still ranks just below dead weight and just above animal bait. Nobody says it out loud. Of course, that would be effort, but the signs are there. When the group sits around the fire, they sit slightly closer to each other, leaving you a generous 4 feet buffer zone. Like you're contagious, which, considering you drank from the wrong stream, might be accurate. Social status here is based on one simple metric: usefulness. Can you hunt? Can you gather? Can you not scream when insects crawl up your leg? No then, congratulations, you're not part of the inner circle. You're more of a temporary guest, a very flammable one. You try to contribute, you offer a route, you try to help Tanner. Hide you, poke a hole straight through it. Someone hands you a bundle of sticks and gestures vaguely toward the fire. You stand there, holding it, like you're about to invent performance art. They stop asking you to help. At one point, a child offers you a sharp rock. You assume it's a gift. It isn't. It's a test. You fail it by holding the blade upside down and bleeding onto your own foot. No one reacts. That's the worst part. No one mocks you. They just move on, like nature, like whether you're not worth getting angry about. Yet, you overhear someone grunt in your direction. It's a tone you don't understand, but you feel it in your bones, in the same way that someone could remark on a log that isn't burning well. You are the log, and you begin to wonder whether the wolves would be a more understanding audience because there isn't a lantern, torch, or warm glow from a bedside table lamp. This isn't threatening or friendly. It's just observational. Like a guillotine, the sun disappears beneath the horizon, and the world abruptly goes dark. Not gloomy, not comfortable. In black, you're not invited. You're the one who sneezed during the hunting party and scared off a deer. Sleep doesn't come easily, and every sound outside the fire's glow sounds like it has a purpose. The fire crackles, casting a flickering circle of light that somehow makes everything just visible enough to be more terrifying. Trees rustle in the distance, and something howls. It's either a wolf or something that eats wolves, but it knows where you are and has been waiting for you to fall asleep. The tribe is already curled up in a pile of hides, and most of the tribe is already curled up together in a warm, collective mass of mutual trust and shared body heat. You sit up, a twig breaks, a branch falls. You stop breathing, and you exhale or snort something from behind the rock wall. You make peace with your gods, who you don't know by name, but you think they'll understand. Even the stars appear to be judging you, which is lovely but pointless. You can't wear them, you can't eat them, and they won't scare off whatever just moved near the cave entrance. You close your eyes, and almost instantly, you open them again. Your brain tells you that you're lying on an uneven slab of earth, wrapped in a damp fur coat, surrounded by people who might or might not notice if you're dragged away in the night. The problem is that if something eats you, it won't be out of malice, but rather out of efficiency. You're weak, slow, and based on the fact that you didn't cook that root earlier, you probably smell like panic. You wake up stiff and somehow colder than when you fell asleep. Which shouldn't be possible, but the Stone Age enjoys new kinds of suffering. Your ankle feels like it lost a battle with a rock, and your arm has a new bite on it, which could be a bug or a rodent. Honestly, you're just relieved that something found you useful outside the cave. The tribe is already awake again, and you're not sure when they sleep or if exhaustion is just something they wrestle into submission like everything else in their lives. You limp toward the fire pit in the hopes of finding something warm, but there isn't, and the ashes are cold. The fire went out sometime during the night, and it seemed like a group decision that didn't involve you or your fingers, which are now numb enough to be considered decorative. When you try to rejoin the group, someone hands you a stick without any explanation or instructions, and you assume it's for poking something, a task, or self-defense. Perhaps they're merely experimenting to see how you'll use it. Your shoulders suffer from carrying too little, too incorrectly, and your muscles ache from performing things they weren't made for, like survival. You fail, of course, at every step. Somewhere back, near the heap of raw tubers you stumbled across. Yesterday, the others are already organizing, and your knees feel like someone filled them with gravel. Here, you're supposed to know, and if you don't, you're supposed to figure it out without asking dumb questions like, is this sharp thing supposed to be covered in blood already? Someone is using bones to reinforce the shelter wall, and someone else is gutting something with terrifying ease. You try to help again, but you manage to trip over a child's toy, which is literally just a small rock with a face on it. The child looks at you as if you've insulted his ancestors. Even the folks who have lived here their entire lives look up and grimace like the sky has played a nasty joke. At first, you believe it's pouring, but what's worse is that you know the full downpour is coming and you're not prepared. The wind picks up and rips through your hide clothing like you're wearing a damp napkin. Your boots, which are just scraps of animal skin tied around your feet, start soaking through right away, and your toes squish. You pretend not to notice. The rain starting in earnest, and the rain starts to fall in cold. Fat drops that feel more like punishment than water. You shuffle over to the edge of the shelter, which is a generous word for some branches tied together with gut strings thing is slick all of a sudden. Like an apology, the smell of wet fur fills the air as the fire splatters the walls. No one wants to hear you duck into the cave in the hopes of finding relief. It's a little better, but not much better. The roof leaks in 3 different places, and the floor is now covered in mud. You watch a centipede confidently walk across your sleeping area, seemingly more prepared for this life than you are. Someone is moving firewood inside, and others are hanging hides to dry near the smoke. You try to help and knock over a stack of tools, and a loud clatter follows. You are now both wet and in the way. Later, someone throws you a half-dry pelt to wear, and you drape it around yourself like a soggy emperor. You try not to look too grateful. It helps a little. You try to ignore the coughing, which is just a minor scratch in your throat, but by mid-morning, you're wheezing like a dying goat. Your nose has decided to take care of itself. Your eyes are watering, and your skin feels warm, not cozy, but infected warm. You tell no one about it because no one is going to take any action. Congratulations. You have officially entered the Stone Age's medical care phase, when there are no clinics or doctors. An elder looks at you, moans, and hands you a wad of crushed leaves, which you chew. There are no herbs neatly placed on a wooden shelf by someone named Fern. You nod earnestly as though it's helping. But your temperature becomes worse. It tastes like rotting spinach, steeped in old sweat. A steam therapy is suggested. This entails pouring water over heated rocks while sitting in a pit adjacent to them. Someone smears a mixture of mud, herbs, and possibly animal fat onto your chest to draw out the spirits as you cough, perspire, and think about dying. It's like a sauna created by someone who has only ever heard of saunas from hallucinations. Apparently, you don't ask questions because you're too busy vibrating from chills and pain. There is no pain relief. Instead, you get a stick to bite on and a knowing look from the tribe's unofficial healer. When you try to sleep, you have strange dreams, like being chased by a bison-sized squirrel in one, or your spear talking in another. You wake up gasping in a puddle of your own sweat and leaf fragments. And by the end of the day, you're not better, but you're not worse either. Which, in Stone Age terms, means you might survive, or you might just be entering Phase 2, bone pain. A woman with exactly 3 teeth and a permanent scowl whispers something in a language that might just be irritated breathing. On your way to sit by the fire today, you bumped into someone by accident. It was only a minor bump on your shoulder, but they looked at you as if you had just challenged them to a duel. You stammered an apology, but they didn't respond. Instead, they stood up, squared their shoulders, and stared at you until your soul left your body through your socks. There is no concept of de-escalation. No one is calming the tension with a gentle reminder that we are all part of a team, and instead, someone casually sharpens a stick nearby not because of your conflict, but just as a general lifestyle choice. But the message is clear. Don't push your luck. It turns out that conflict resolution in the Stone Age is not based on open dialogue and active listening, but rather on a let's see who survives this disagreement kind of culture. Stairs are used to settle disagreements. There are choices if it gets out of hand, whether it's quiet or abrupt acts of really personal aggression. You attempt to make amends by offering a smoked fish, but it is rejected not because of the gesture, but rather because the fish is overcooked and you have offended someone's grandmother who created that recipe 8 generations ago. Eventually, a tribal elder mutters something and breaks a small stick in half, which is symbolic of something you don't know, but the man you bumped grunts and leaves. You're not sure what you've learned, but obviously you're not worth killing. But later, someone pats you on the back, either to reassure you or to see how many ribs you still have. In the Stone Age, keeping the peace required a great deal of talent. A mistaken look, an unequal portion of meat, or excessive breathing while you're asleep can have negative effects. Though it might be a stretch, you're alive, albeit not exactly. Thriving, your clothes are wet, and your pride is shredded. In modern times, you leave a 1-star review here, leave the tribe, or they leave you. You can't argue your way out of this situation. There's no agree to disagree, just agree or dig a hole. Even though every muscle in your body has officially complained and your stomach hasn't forgiven you, the fact that you're still breathing counts as success in this case. The fact that the tribe hasn't banished you could be an oversight. Or perhaps they've decided in private that you're too entertaining to part with just yet. After all, they watched you try to scale that tree for berries, and the wasps did give the group 6 minutes of quality time together. As night falls again, you sit by the fire, not as close as you were yesterday, and you're starting to grasp the rhythm of this world and the peaceful mornings. Nobody has ever given you an explanation for the harsh sun, the never-ending necessity to earn everything: food, housing, respect with untrained hands. This isn't a world of instructions. Rather, it's a world of observation, imitation, and failure, until failure teaches you what survival won't be. For example, when someone hands you a strip of roasted meat, you nod in gratitude. It's tough, salty, and has a hint of fur. You chew it as if it were your last meal. It's possible that you still don't belong here, but gradually, painfully, your brain is beginning to adapt. You now understand that fire doesn't make itself. Water is rarely a gift, and roots are trying to kill you. For now, nothing is biting you in the Stone Age, which is about as good as it gets. Technically, you wouldn't last a day, but let's not push our luck with a second one. The tribe talks softly in their own language, which is more gesture and expression than words. You catch none of it, but you nod anyway, and it seems courteous. You lie down on your patch of cold earth, wrapped in furs that smell like every animal in the forest played tug-of-war with them. Your body aches, and your dignity is gone. But for now, nothing is biting you. There was stiffness and stillness at first. A young daimyo from western Japan named Lord Asano Naganori of Akko was called to the shogun's palace in Edo to perform a delicate duty, to receive and entertain envoys from the Emperor of Kyoto. This was no easy task. The court demanded precision. Protocol was everything, and a man named Kira Yoshinaka, a high-ranking court official and master of rituals, was watching over the ceremonies. He was notorious for expecting bribes, but he was not one to play those games. Honor was not a bargaining chip, and perhaps to his own detriment, he had a face that could not pretend to smile. After noticing, Kira became resentful and started insulting Asano in the days that followed. Silent barbs and incisive corrections, small-time humiliations, whispers reverberated through Idedo Castle's courtly halls. Kira had called Asano a country bumpkin, made fun of his manners, and made him wait outside of rooms where tension was supposed to be built. Then, on the 21st day of the 3rd month in 1701, it broke out in a hallway of Adu Castle. Asano pulled out his short sword and attacked Kira, grazing the older man's face and shoulder with his blade. This was not a murder, but to draw a weapon. Inside the shogun's palace was unforgivable regardless of the provocation. Asano was arrested right away, and the shogun passed judgment without any inquiry or second chances. By sunset, Lord Asano was ordered to commit sukaku, ritual suicide. His lands were seized. His retainers were expelled. His family was dishonored. And most importantly, Kira escaped unpunished and victorious. However, the story didn't end there. As the world went on, Oishi Kuranasak, one of Asano's now masterless samurai, started to plan quietly and patiently. This wasn't just about Ritai. It was about something deeper, something older, a test of Bushido, the warrior's way. And it had only just begun. Lord Asano's death should have signaled the end. His house was abolished. His men were disbanded. And the shogun had made it clear that there would be no vendetta. Justice had been swift and ruthless, and Kira stayed in his estate under the protection of the law. But the samurai code outside the shogun's palace told a different tale. Instead of crying or yelling, Oishi Kuranasak, the chief retainer of Asano, bowed his head, closed the Ako samurai, and obeyed the decree. On the outside, he submitted, but on the inside, he waited for the Ronin to scatter. Some went back to their families, while others became merchants, monks, or even beggars. The world thought they had moved on, believing their allegiance had died with their lord. But beneath the surface, a plan was coiling tighter. Oishi played the fool, moving to Kyoto, gambling in public, and taking up with courtesans for more than a year. He presented the image of a man broken by disgrace, disheveled, drunk, dishonored, the perfect portrait of failure. He knew that the shogunate was watching and that revenge was illegal, especially when it was directed at a man like Kira, who still held rank and favor. Any hint of plotting would result in arrest, or worse, execution before the deed could be carried out. Meanwhile, his fellow Ronin were doing the opposite in secret. Letters in dark corners of tea houses and shrines, they stayed in touch, they studied. Kira's movements, they measured the layout of his Edeto mansion, they learned the guards' habits, the gate's rhythms, and the pulse of the household Kira, for his part, relaxed. He had friends in high places, and a scar that healed well his enemies had. Vanished into the wind, what more could they do? They had no master, no name, and no power. And this was exactly what Uishi wanted him to think, because behind the sake-stained robes and slurred words was a mind sharper than any blade. He wasn't just planning a killing, he was crafting a statement, one that would speak to all of Japan, one that would show the world that Bushido, the true Bushido, was not dead, not yet, and in the frozen heart of winter, when the time was right, that silence would finally shatter by the time snow began to fall over Adu in late 1702. 47 Ronin had made their decision. No more waiting, no more watching. The time for vengeance had come. Oishi Kuranosak gathered his scattered brothers in arms. Some traveled for days. To reach Adu, others had never truly left, but one by one they reassembled, not as wandering men, but as samurai. Once more, not for pay, not for honor restored, but for duty. The kind that lives after death. The plan was precise. Each man had a role. This was not a brawl, it was a performance, and every detail mattered. They forged new weapons, silent and fast. They crafted winter. Armor light enough to scale walls, but thick enough to deflect a strike. Fire brigade, complete with uniforms to avoid suspicion if anyone questioned why a group of men was marching through the city at night. Kira's mansion was a fortress. High walls, dozens of guards, multiple gates, but it had been studied for over a year. The layout was memorized. Aishi made sure his own family was safe by divorcing his wife and sending her, and their younger children, far from the coming blood. He knew what this would cost, that it might not work, and that even if it did, they would all be sentenced to death. But Buscetto's method left no room for personal safety. On the 14th night of the 12th month, January 30th, 1703, by the Western calendar, they moved snow-covered at 2 o'clock in the morning. The Ronins divided into two teams, one attacking the rear gate and the other the front. When both sides were in position, a signal would be given. The mission was to simply seize the house, kill Kira, and disturb as little of the city as possible. No innocence, no needless blood justice. A Detto was the ideal ally, muffling footsteps and deadening sound. Justice would not wait any longer after some had waited for more than a year, while others had spent that year feigning forgetfulness. Now, with swords drawn and the night watching, forgetting was no longer required. There was no shouting or reckless charges when the attack started. Aishi's front team used a battering ram to breach the main gate and smash through the heavy doors before the guards realized they were under siege. Meanwhile, the rear team scaled the walls and silently dispatched sentries with the practiced efficiency of men who had practiced this night 100 times in their minds. All of this was done with just coordinated, measured violence under the pale winter moon. The Ronin moved like wolves, slaying opposition with quick, precise strikes. They didn't kill indiscriminately. They shouted out that only Kira was their target. Anyone who didn't resist was spared. Kira's household was in a panic, and the guards scrambled in confusion, half-dressed, and many drunk or asleep servants screamed. Lanterns were lit too late. Chikara, the eldest son of Oishi, was only 16 years old when he fought alongside his father during all of Bushido's talks. This was no abstract ideal. It was blood, steel, smoke in the lungs, swords slipping on, icy tiles, and loyalty carried out to the letter with a price carved into flesh. The Ronin searched the mansion for Kira, but the man had disappeared. They searched every room and hidden corner, questioned servants, and eventually discovered a secret courtyard in a shed behind the garden. It was a man in simple robes, his face pale, his body trembling, and he refused to identify himself. He wore the scar, but would not talk. Ishi offered him the opportunity to die with honor, placing a dagger in front of him like a true samurai. But Kira was unable to accept responsibility for the damage Lord Asano had done to his face almost 2 years prior. Instead, he just stared in shock. When his time came, Oishi bowed once before striking Kira. Yoshinaka died as a coward, not a lord. The Ronin took his head, wrapped it in cloth, and marched with composure through Edito's snow-covered streets while wearing full armor. They carried the trophy to Sangaku-ji Temple, where Lord Asano was buried. They cleaned the head, placed it in front of his grave, and prayed that their vengeance was complete. When morning arrived, Hideto woke up to the impossible news that it had spread like wildfire. Kira, in the center of the city, Yoshinaka was killed by 47 instead of hiding or running. The Ronin proceeded in formation to the temple where their master was buried. They didn't try to get away. They just knelt, displayed the severed head, and waited. The normally bustling city, which was filled with samurai and merchants, became oddly silent. They were referred to as heroes by some and criminals by others, but no one called them cowards. The public didn't see criminals. Instead, they saw men who adhered to the deeper, older law of loyalty which the shogunate deliberated for weeks. This wasn't just about crime and punishment. It was about the essence of samurai culture. The authorities were now in a difficult situation because the law made it clear that revenge killings were illegal and that samurai were not above justice, regardless of how poetic their cause. Although the 47 men stayed at Sangakuji, they did not resist or beg. Instead, they sat in quiet reflection, tending to Lord Asano's grave and waiting for their fate. Aishi, the mastermind behind it all, said nothing in public because he had already said everything through his actions. Eventually, the decision was made that the Ronin would be allowed to die honorably. They would not be executed as criminals, but would be ordered to commit seppuku ritual suicide like the samurai they still claimed to be. Each man was given a dagger. On the morning of February 4th, 1703, and they were all dressed in white robes, which are symbolic of death and purity. They bowed to the officials, to one another, and to Lord Asano's memory before cutting themselves, one by one, under the direction of a second. Who would perform the ritual with a clean decapitation? Without hesitation, even Chikara, Owisi's adolescent son, grasped the sword. No one hesitated, and they died not in shame, but in legend. Their remains were buried next to their teacher at Sangakuji, and their graves are still there, because they accomplished what life could not. 47 stones in orderly rows, draped with incense and donations from travelers who continue to murmur their names, have become everlasting. For centuries, samurai were expected to kill without hesitation and die without complaint. However, the 47 Ronin blurred the lines between being criminals and being paragons of loyalty. They disobeyed the shogun and honored their lord in death more fully than most had in life. The story of the 47 Ronin didn't fade. It reverberated through the streets of Ideto, then into the halls of power, and finally into the heart of Japan. Justice was defined by the law of man or the warrior Tokugawa's will in. Bushido's teachings of submission to the state or one's lord. Authorities attempted to minimize the incident because they were afraid of copycats and chaos, but it was too late. The story had spread and was becoming uncontrollable. Within weeks, kabuki plays were being performed with sparsely veiled retellings of the same story, but with different characters. The authorities outlawed these plays. New plays popped up anyway. People bought woodblock prints showing the Ronin mid-attack, kneeling in seppuku, or marching solemnly with Kira's head. Even those who believed in strict obedience found themselves conflicted because while the Ronin had acted outside the law, they had done so with dignity, with restraint. They didn't loot, they didn't gloat, they didn't run. They had waited, planned, struck, and then surrendered in. That restraint, people saw something. Pure something old Aishi Koronosek became the archetype of the ideal retainer. Calm, strategic, loyal to death, his son Chikara became the image of youthful devotion, the younger. Ronin were remembered as noble souls who sacrificed futures they never got to live, and the story didn't just survive. Evolved over time, it became a national legend, celebrated in plays, novels, and eventually films. Every generation found something in the tale, whether it was pride, sorrow, or a blueprint for courage. In a world where loyalty is often a word on paper, the Ronin had written theirs in blood and snow, and whether or not the shogunate approved, the people had decided these men were not traitors. They were the last true samurai, the 47 graves at Sangakuji. Temple became more than memorials. They became a shrine, not only to the men buried there, but to the very spirit of samurai. Honor pilgrims came from across Japan, lighting incense, bowing low, and whispering prayers, not to gods, but to men. The temple itself became a quiet paradox in a city of noise and commerce. Sangakuji was still monks tended the grounds with solemn care. Snow fell over the headstones each winter, just as it had the night. Kira died each year on the anniversary of the attack, December 14th, by the lunar calendar. Visitors gather to commemorate the deed. Lanterns flicker and incense hangs thick in the air. Some arrive in full samurai attire, others come silently, leaving flowers or coins or notes of gratitude. Even those who didn't believe in vengeance found themselves drawn to the site because whatever your stance on law or ethics, you couldn't ignore the sacrifice, the discipline, the stillness of 47 men who gave up their futures for an idea older than the shogunate itself. For generations, the graves were treated with awe. School children were taken there to learn what loyalty meant. Soldiers visited before being sent to war writers, poets, lines scribbled in notebooks, trying to grasp the quiet power of what had happened. And while the world outside changed, Ado becoming Tokyo, Japan, transforming from a feudal land into a modern state, the story didn't fade. Instead, it grew, even during the Meiji Restoration, when samurai were abolished, and the code of Bushido was folded into nationalism. The tale remained. It was repurposed, yes, but never forgotten. Films were made, plays were revived, books were translated into languages the Ronin had never heard. Tourists now visit Sangakuji alongside skyscrapers and vending machines. They take selfies as people do, but even so, most fall silent when they step before the stone of Oishi Kuranosaki. There's something about it, something still, something exact. Here lies a man who waited a year to strike one blow and knew he would die for it. Here lies a man who chose loyalty over safety. You can still feel the weight of that choice even after 3 centuries. The snow has not melted as the centuries passed. The story of the 47 Ronin drifted from history into legend, and from legend into entertainment. What had begun as a real act of vengeance under the Tokugawa shogunate was now theater, quite literally, by the mid-18th century. The tale was immortalized as Chushingura, a kabuki and bunraku drama that altered names and dramatized events but kept the soul intact. Loyalty, sacrifice, justice delayed, but not denied. Audiences wept, cheered, returned to see it again and again. The characters became archetypes. The Aishi Kira, the stoic genius, and Chikara, the haughty villain. The performances are passed down from generation to generation like treasures by the honorable young performers who specialize in these parts. As Japan opened to the West in the 19th century, the 47 Ronin became widely known. Scholars translated the story, and admirers praised its moral weight. It was the type of story that Victorian Europe loved: orderly, noble, tragic, and Hollywood, of course, had its own ideas. Some families played Oishi for decades, and while the scripts changed, the meaning remained constant. Some films were made with reverence, while others were made with less. For example, in 2013, a fantasy action film starring Keanu Reeves reimagined the story with witches, demons, and a half-English protagonist. It bombed in Japan. The people who still held candles at Sangaku came for something more real and reverent than computer-generated imagery. But the fact that such a film was made at all says volumes, because the narrative was so widely known. It could be perverted to the point that it could no longer be ignored in manga and anime. Stories of banished warriors, lone swordsmen, and difficult missions are subtle examples of the Ronin's echoes. Disorganized groups of devoted supporters opposing corrupt authority. Although modern, Japan has moved far beyond the days of katanas and lords. The idea of loyalty surviving even when the system has failed you still lingers. It appears in boardrooms, classrooms, pop songs, and protest speeches, not always directly, but rather as a whisper that real honor may be inconvenient, difficult, and even illegal, but it endures. And every time it does, the 47 Ronin rises again. This is why the structure is familiar. 300 years later, the 47 Ronin are still there. The reason their story endures so long is that it has no clear conclusion. They are not merely historical figures. They are symbols that you can refer to when everything else becomes hazy. When justice and law no longer agree, and when loyalty is more important than life. The Tokugawa shogunate wanted to put an end to the discussion with them, but their deaths set a slow-burning fire under every institution that attempted to define what it meant to be a samurai. Even today, you can find university professors debating both sides of the issue. Yes, they all died, but in doing so, they sparked a debate that has never completely died down. Were they heroes or criminals? Was their loyalty noble or dangerously outdated? Did they elevate Bushido or prove it incompatible with law and order? There are remnants of the Ronin everywhere in modern Japan. Some claim they were glorified killers who were holding onto a dying code, while others believe they were the best of Itan, unwavering moral compass in a society growing more bureaucratic, with the public remained solidly in the second camp. Corporate employees who refused to betray a boss during scandal, even at the cost of their own careers. Soldiers who serve quietly and sacrifice without complaint. Even manga protagonists who stand alone, armed with nothing but principle. The Ronin are not relics, they're reference points. And in a time where loyalty is rare and truth is negotiable, their story feels strangely modern. Oishi Koronosuke never wrote a memoir. He didn't leave behind a treatise on ethics. But he left behind a question, sharpened like a blade. What do you serve, and what are you willing to pay for it? The 47 Ronin answered that question, not with words, not with slogans, but with time, silence, and finally, their lives. They obeyed a dead man. They broke the law to keep a promise, and in doing so, they became more than samurai. They became a mirror, one that every generation must look into and ask itself, would I have followed, and would I have had the courage to stop in ancient Egypt? To harm a cat was to flirt with disaster, not just social shame, but legal punishment and sometimes mob justice. That's how serious it was. The goddess Bastet, daughter of Ra, was the feline deity of home fertility, music, and protection. She started out as a fierce and destructive lioness, but eventually softened into a cat that retained power but gained grace. Her temples were filled with offerings, jewelry, perfumes, and most importantly, real, living, breathing cats who roamed freely and were considered manifestations of the goddess herself. Archaeologists have discovered vast cat cemeteries near Bastet's main temple in Bubastis, where mummified cats, wrapped with the same care as human corpses, lay in neat rows, some preserved with jewelry, and others preserved with resins and perfumes. The symbolism was deep. Cats hunted snakes, the eternal enemy of Ra, the sun god. Killing a snake wasn't just pest control. It was cosmic warfare. Cats lounged in sunlight, patrolled granaries, and had that distant, unreadable look that seemed otherworldly. When Egyptians saw that, they didn't think lazy pets. Instead, they thought divine mystery. This wasn't a novel idea. It was an industry. In the island of Crete, surrounded by the rolling blue of the Ion Sea, cats, in their grace and independence, stood at the intersection of beauty and the sacred, not just pets' portals. According to Greek historians like Herodotus, the Persians carried cats as living shields, knowing the Egyptians would hesitate to strike. To the modern eye, this may seem excessive, but to the Egyptians, animals weren't beneath humans. They were closer to the gods. The Manoans, one of Europe's most highly developed civilizations, not only admired bulls, but also ritualized them, created mythology about them, and painted them on walls like gods. The bull ruled not in meadows, but in palaces. When you enter Kossus's magnificent palace, you'll see frescoes that pulsate with energy, including scenes of leaping bulls, acrobats, and acrobats vaulting over horns. This was more than just a sport. It was a sacred spectacle known as bull leaping, a ritual dance that was a death-defying act of agility and respect in which men and women participated, not to kill the bull, but to engage with it in order to bridge the gap between the divine and human, because to the Manoans, the bull was a cosmic force rather than just an animal. Most likely, the symbolism was deeply ingrained in their mythology. Maybe it was a fiction, but myths are sometimes reflections of more profound realities. The fabled Minotaur, half bull, half man, was thought to reside in a labyrinth under Konos. Maybe the minnow was a reminder of the ceremonial power of people and animals fusing together in hallowed places. In a time when people read the world through symbols, the bull was a symbol of strength, fertility, and motion. Its horns mirrored the crescent moon. Its roar was like thunder, and its body was so large and muscular that it seemed too powerful to be made of mere flesh. Although the Manawans were less bloodthirsty than later Greek cultures, some bulls were ritually killed, but others were honored in life by being paraded, painted, and praised. The power of the bull wasn't always in its death, but rather in its presence. Unlike the Roman arena where bulls died for amusement, for the Minoan Cree, facing a bull was not only bravery, it was a momentary balance between flesh and myth in the dense jungles of Mesoamerica. Beneath the tangled canopy and echoing bird calls, the jaguar, a creature ruled not by size but by mystery, was the jaguar to the mare, Om, and Aztecs. Minoan rituals seem to emphasize harmony, a dangerous, respectful dance between human and beast. The point was not to dominate, but to touch something beyond the bull. This spotted predator was more than simply an animal. It was a deity disguised as a shapeshifter and a globe traveler. The jaguar hunted at night and moved stealthily through shadows, its eyes penetrating the darkness, which was holy in a society where night stood for the unknown and the underworld. The earliest known Mesoamerican society created enormous stone heads that some people think have feline characteristics, and any animal that could pass through it easily served as a guide, messenger, or king. Fiery eyes, curled lips, and broad nostrils. Additionally, their artwork depicts a hybrid of a human and a jaguar, sometimes with snarling jaws and teeth. Scholars continue to debate its meaning, but one thing is certain: the Maya took this a step further. Their kings frequently wore jaguar pelt helmets and glyphs that linked their power to the beast. The underworld, known as Sibaba, was a place of trials and darkness, and the jaguar was the creature that roamed its halls freely. Some Maya gods, such as the powerful jaguar god of the underworld, embodied the duality of night and death, which was feared but necessary. Then came the Aztecs, whose elite warriors were known as the Jaguar Knights. They weren't just soldiers. They were sacred fighters, chosen to channel the jaguar's ferocity. Clad in full jaguar pelts, complete with snarling masks and claws, they didn't just fight like jaguars. They believed they were jaguars. In the temples and forests of ancient India, the elephant was more than just a majestic animal. It was living divinity carved in flesh and muscle. No creature loomed larger in both size and symbolism to the ancient Indians. They embodied strength, wisdom, memory, royalty, and the sacred rhythm of the universe itself. As grim as it sounds to modern ears, sacrifice was central. To kill a jaguar was to release a sacred force to offer its heart, which was to give the gods something they recognized as kin-knot out of cruelty. The elephant-headed god, Ganesha, has a damaged tusk, a tummy full of candy, and a smile that never goes away. According to one legend, Ganesha was created by the goddess Parvati to protect her privacy. When the god Shiva attempted to enter her chamber, he blocked him in rage, not realizing that this was Parvati's husband. He is revered throughout Indian culture as the god of new beginnings, the remover of obstacles, and the one to whom people pray before weddings, travels, or home construction. When Parvati saw what had transpired, her grief rocked heaven and earth, and Shiva decapitated the kid to make atonement. Ganesha was reborn, part human, part elephant, and entirely divine after Shiva promised to restore the boy's life using the head of the first creature he found, an elephant. However, the veneration of elephants goes beyond myth. In ancient India, real elephants served as symbols of kingship. They were the thrones of war, armored, decorated, and adored by those who rode and feared them. An army with elephants was not just powerful, it was blessed. Temples often kept elephants as part of their rituals in the southern state of Kerala. Sacred elephants are still paraded in annual festivals, adorned with golden headpieces and painted tusks. Devotees bow as they pass, not out of fear, but reverence. These elephants are seen as earthly forms of divine power, slow-moving gods that walk among mortals. In Vedic literature, the elephant is associated with rain and fertility, especially the cosmic elephant, Arata. The mount of Indra, king of the gods, Arata, was said to be born from the churning of the ocean. White as a cloud, with multiple heads, trumpeting storms into being too ancient. India, the elephant, was not merely an animal, it was thunder made flesh, wisdom on 4 legs, and the quiet strength of eternity. To most ancient peoples, the serpent was never just a snake. It was a symbol of power, rebirth, danger, knowledge, and the divine, and depending on where you stood in the ancient world, it could either be your sacred protector or the mouth of chaos. In ancient Mesopotamia, the snake performed both parts. The Sumerians did not despise serpents. Rather, they saw them as complex, dangerous, and necessary. In Hinduism, snakes, also known as nagars, were considered semi-daving spirits connected to water, fertility, and cosmic balance, rather than monsters or demons. The god Ningashita, who was portrayed with serpents emerging from his shoulders, was a deity of the underworld and vegetation, the Vishnu deity of preservation resting on the coiling body of the endless snake Shasha, which floats on the cosmic ocean, is one of the most famous pictures in Indian mythology. The Nagas resided in enormous, jeweled palaces under rivers and lakes. In the Book of Numbers, Moses uses a bronze serpent on a pole to heal the plagued Israelites. This is a rare instance in which the snake becomes salvation rather than sin in Mesoamerica. The serpent wasn't threatening. Rather, it was time itself, patient and eternally coiled. However, serpents weren't always gentle in the Hebrew tradition. The snake in Eden was crafty and cursed, forever linked to deceit and the fall of man. Then there is the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, an image that appeared from Egypt to Greece and represented infinity, the cycle of life and death, destruction and rebirth. To the ancient mind, the serpent wasn't evil. Rather, it was mystery embodied, silent, cold-blooded, and eternal. Not quite beast, not quite God, but always watching, always returning. The feathered serpent god, Quetzalcoatl, a combination of snake and bird, represented wind, learning, and creation itself. His duality was crucial as he was grounded in the earth, but able to fly. Crocodiles were a daily threat to the average villager along the Nile, but instead of being feared, they were revered, honored, and even protected. This uneasy reverence was centered around the crocodile god, Sobek, a deity with the body of a man and the head of a crocodile. Sobek was not a mere swamp spirit. He was a fertility deity, a creator, a symbol of the unpredictable might of the Nile, a protector of the pharaoh and the army's guardian. In one myth, Sobek assisted in restoring Osiris's body, making him not only a terrifying deity, but also a healer and life restorer. The military, the Nile, was his bloodstream, and crocodiles were his eyes, messengers and avatars. They swam beneath the reeds like priests in motion. The most well-known of these temples was in Crocodilopolis, which is actually in the Fume Oasis. There, the priests took care of a live, sacred crocodile that was thought to be the living embodiment of Sobek himself. The animal was adorned with gold and gems, fed the best cuts of meat, and lounged in an artificial lake, treated like royalty. When it passed away, it was mummified, carefully wrapped, perfumed, and buried. Thousands of mummified crocodiles have been discovered across Egypt, often buried with baby crocs. Alongside them, like spiritual offspring, but Sobek wasn't just about animals and offerings. He represented the brutal side of nature, the reminder that power can be beautiful and terrifying all at once. A Nile could bring life or drown you. Crocodiles could be gods or devourers. Worship wasn't a shield against danger. It was a recognition of it. The ancient Egyptians didn't try to tame the crocodile. They honored it because, in its jaws, they saw the smile of a god in the cold. Shadow-draped world of the Norse animals weren't pets or companions. They were omens, warnings, pieces of prophecy given teeth and wings, and no creatures loomed larger in this harsh mythology than the wolf and the raven. Let's start with the ravens. Hugin and Munin, the ever-watchful eyes of Odin. The All-Father, their names meant thought and memory. Each morning they flew across the world, collecting secrets and signs. Each night they perched on Odin's shoulders, whispering what they had seen. These were not just birds, they were extensions of a god's mind, the very embodiment of wisdom, gathering, and foresight in battlefields. Ravens fed on corpses to the Norse. Their presence wasn't just gruesome, it was sacred. A raven, circling above, wasn't just looking for carrion, it was reading fate. And then came the wolves. Fenrir, the great wolf, was not just another beast in the Norse bestiary. He was the apocalypse on 4 legs, born of the trickster god. Loki and the giantess Fenrir was fated to devour Odin himself during Ragnarok, the final. Destruction of the gods, terrified of this destiny. The gods tricked Fenrir into being bound by a magical chain. He broke every chain but one, a silken thread forged from impossible things, the sound of a cat's footsteps, a mountain's roots, and a fish's breath. When they finally restrained him, he screamed in rage and waited for the end of the world. Although 2 wolves, Gary and Freki, were with him and ate the food from his table, Odin famously only needed wine. In the north, animals weren't meant to be cute, loyal, or even tame. They were messengers of war, symbols of prophecy, and the final things you might see before glory or death. In ancient Vedic India, the cow wasn't just a farm animal. It was sacred essence distilled into muscle and milk. To understand its role in Vedic culture is to understand how deeply the ancients saw divinity in the everyday Rigveda. Just as the ravens represented the raw, primal side of divine power, loyalty, hunger, and instinctive to the Norse. These animals weren't metaphors, but rather living forces of the cosmos, part of the great cold machinery of fate. One of the world's oldest sacred texts describes cows as suffering rather than being killed. They were connected to Prithvi, the earth, and Aditi, the infinite mother goddess. The cow was not viewed as something distinct from nature. Rather, it was nature that walked among humans like a living blessing, and fed like the earth, and gave like the heavens. The use of milk, butter, ghee, and curds as sacrifices during yajna fire ceremonies, in which the gods were nourished by flame, was more than just a show of devotion. It was cosmic alchemy that turned the cow's gift into heavenly energy. Cows were associated with Kamadano, the mythological cow of plenty who was adored and not produced. She was thought to live in the hermitages of sages and emerge during times of need to restore balance and abundance. Kamadanu was said to grant any request and nourish all of creation. The Zabu, India's native humped cattle, were decorated with bells and garlands during festivals like Kopashtami. Cows were bathed, painted, and were ripped. In some villages, they were even led into temples to receive blessings or give them, unlike the warlike status of bulls and Cree, or the feared glory of jaguars in Meso America. The cow represented gentleness, restraint, and sustenance. Even when empires rose and fell, the cow remained untouched, politically neutral, yet spiritually untouchable. This reverence extended to laws ancient Indian legal codes, discouraged and sometimes outright banned cow slaughter, not because of economics, but because it was considered a crime. Against the dharmic order, to harm a cow was to wound the cosmic balance, and even today, thousands of years later, that reverence hasn't vanished. It echoes in temples, in fields, in daily prayers, whispered, beside roadside shrines in Vedic India. The cow wasn't just the backbone of the village economy, it was the mother of creation, patiently chewing grass while holding the cosmos in its breath. Across ancient cultures, birds soared higher than mere animals. They weren't just admired for flight. They were believed to transcend realms, earth, sky, heaven. Underworld birds passed through them all to ancient minds. This made them natural messengers of the divine. In ancient Egypt, the gods granted the ibis a holy position. Thoth, the god of magic, writing, and knowledge, Thoth was frequently portrayed with the head of an ibis, long-beaked, thoughtful, and poised. The bird's deliberate movements reflected the god's own measured intellect. Ibis were common along the banks of the Nile, and their presence was considered auspicious, linked to the cycles of the moon and the balance of truth itself. Thousands of them were mummified and buried in honor, not because they were useful, but because they were holy. Next came the hawk, which represented Horus, the god of kingship and the rising sun. With its penetrating eyes and skyward flight, the hawk represented divine watchfulness. The eye of Horus, one of Egypt's most lasting emblems of protection, was inspired by the hawk's acute vision in Mesopotamia, and pharaohs who were thought of as living sons of Horus allied themselves with this predatory bird. The eagle was associated with the gods of storm and battle, a creature too magnificent to exist on earth alone. In the Gilgamesh epic, birds frequently serve as warnings or signals of favor, spanning the gap between the world of the gods and the human world. Above all, the eagle was adored by the Greeks as the holy animal of Zeus, the ruler of the gods. According to myth, Zeus would launch thunderbolts from the sky while holding an eagle, which came to represent divine authority. In India, quick, harsh, and untouchable, part eagle, part human. The magnificent Garuda was the Mount Vahana of Vishnu, the god of preservation. Garuda was not a pet. Rather, he was a cosmic fighter, a guardian of Dharma, and a devourer of serpents. His image was used on temples, shields, and royal insignia. And even in societies without gods, the symbolism of freedom and alteration of vision persisted. For the ancients, birds were more than simply birds. They were the wings of the god's eyes of sky and moving souls. They traveled through the seasons, disappeared behind clouds, and reappeared like omens. He surrounded himself with books, read Virgil Latch and Voltaire by candlelight, and envisioned himself as a thinker rather than a ruler. Plantations, one of his famous quotes was, "I cannot live without books," when he declared all men are created equal in the Declaration of Independence. He meant it literally. It wasn't political theater. Rather, it was a philosophical conviction, a statement that would endure throughout time. Liberty, reason, self-governance. Jefferson believed in these ideals. He envisioned a society in which free-thinking farmers farmed the land, kings fell, and knowledge overcame superstition. However, even as he advocated for liberty, the issue was never with his vision, but rather with who was allowed to participate. Jefferson owned more than 600 enslaved people over his lifetime. He knew the system was wrong. He wrote against slavery, called it a moral depravity, a hideous blot. He even proposed gradual emancipation in some of his earlier writings. But when it came time to act, to free the people who lived and worked at Monticello, he hesitated. Most he never freed. Some he sold, and others, like Sally Hemings, were held in a far more intimate, complicated captivity to Jefferson. Liberty was an ideal to chase, but only within a narrow circle. Ain't white men with property that was the political universe he truly imagined, even as he dreamed of abolishing aristocracy. He kept the deeply unequal structure of slavery intact, benefiting from it materially and politically. It's a contradiction that historians still wrestle with today. Was Jefferson a hypocrite, a product of his time, or simply a brilliant man with blind spots large enough to swallow generations? Whatever the answer, one thing is clear. The man who championed the natural rights of humankind did so from the porch of a plantation, overlooking land tilled by the very people his pen had forgotten. And that paradox would haunt the rest of his legacy, even as his words helped ignite revolutions across continents. Jefferson was a philosopher of liberty, but he lived a life fenced in by chains of his own. Making before he was president, Thomas Jefferson was an architect, not just of buildings, but of ideas. The United States was still an experiment, raw and unfinished, and Jefferson wanted to shape it with the precision of a draftsman holding a compass over blank parchment after writing the Declaration of Independence in 1776. Jefferson returned to Virginia, where he tried to rewire the legal system from the ground up. He proposed bills to eliminate primogeniture, the law that passed property only to the eldest son, and religious establishments that favored the Anglican Church. He believed in dismantling inherited privilege, leveling the field for white men to rise on merit rather than bloodline. In 1779, as governor of Virginia, he faced the grim logistics of war. British troops invaded. Jefferson fled his estate when the Redcoats arrived, a move critics would later call cowardly. But he wasn't a warrior. He was a planner, a thinker, a builder. His true battleground was in legislation and letters. When Jefferson went to France as minister in the 1780s, he absorbed the Enlightenment like a sponge. He dined with philosophers, studied architecture, and marveled at European civilization, all while condemning its aristocracy. He returned to America with crates of books, sketches of domes and colonnades, and a refined vision for the new republic as Secretary of State under Washington. Jefferson quickly clashed with Alexander Hamilton. The nation was splitting into factions. Hamilton favored a strong central government and industry. Jefferson envisioned a republic of independent farmers and weak federal power. Their debates weren't just policy disagreements. They were opposing blueprints for America's soul. Jefferson feared cities. He called them sores on the body politic. To him, the virtuous citizen was rural, self-reliant, educated, and surrounded by land, preferably inherited, but painted with the brush of hard work. His distrust of banks, industrialization, and elite entanglements fueled his lifelong suspicion of centralized power. And yet, Jefferson himself was never entirely free of elite. He was one wealthy, landowning, and deeply political. He embodied the very contradictions he claimed to oppose. Still, in this early phase of his life, Jefferson laid out the foundation of the American identity, a land of liberty and equality for some, and a government designed by thinkers who believed reason could be written into law. But already the cracks had begun to show when Thomas Jefferson took the presidential oath in 1801. He called it the Revolution of 1800, peaceful, bloodless, and ideological after bitter party. Infighting, a sitting president had handed power to his political rival, a transfer almost unheard of in the age of monarchs. Jefferson, who detested pomp and circumstance, arrived at his inauguration wearing simple clothing, without a horse-drawn chariot or powdered wigs. He was a man with ambition and principles, and he stated that he wanted a simple administration. The most famous act of Jefferson's presidency was the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, when he paid $15 million to Napoleon for a piece of land that doubled the size of the young republic. The land covered more than 800,000 square miles, stretching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. This was undoubtedly one of the most significant real estate deals in human history, and it went against everything Jefferson had claimed to believe in. The Constitution did not say that the federal government could purchase new territory, and Jefferson knew this. He even considered proposing a constitutional amendment to legalize it, but he quietly dropped the idea. Ultimately, he justified the act with typical philosophical grace, stating that necessity had triumphed over orthodoxy idealism once again. Jefferson envisioned an empire of liberty, a country of immense farmers spanning large stretches of territory, founded on independence and morality. However, growth had drawbacks, as the newly acquired land brought up difficult issues. Would slavery extend westward and affect the Native American nations that already resided there? Could the federal government maintain such a vast territory? In the hopes of discovering a waterway to the Pacific and documenting its wonders, Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark to explore the new frontier. But his private correspondence disclosed more ambitious goals. For a guy who professed to enjoy withdrawing to his garden, economic development, territorial claims, and yes, a developing sense of national destiny as president, Jefferson had a great deal of authority and used it as he saw fit. He had transformed the republic into an empire virtually overnight, and the seeds he sowed would alter the course of history. Monticello was a symbol of the principles of the Enlightenment. Jefferson himself created the symmetry, reason, beauty, which was full of literary allusions, innovations, and classical allusions. But underneath the beauty of the architecture lay a more sinister reality. At any given time, over 100 enslaved men, women, and children lived and worked at Monticello, a plantation that was also fueled by their labor. They cared for the fields, built the bricks, prepared the food, and kept up the mansion that Jefferson referred to as his refuge without them. The contradiction at the core of Jefferson's legacy is that Monticello and Jefferson's lifestyle could not have coexisted. The author of all men are created equal, owned human beings as property and not just owned, managed, sold, and punished them. He also kept meticulous records of the enslaved people at Monticello, listing them by name, age, and value. At times, he referred to them as assets. Jefferson publicly condemned slavery as immoral and detrimental to both slaveholders and enslaved people, calling it a moral depravity and a grotesque stain. Despite this, he freed nearly none of the people he had enslaved. During his lifetime, over 600 people passed through his ownership, and less than 10 were freed, some of them for financial reasons. For the most of his life, Jefferson was heavily indebted, and his slave labor served as collateral. However, some of this was due to inertia, or the reluctance or incapacity to overthrow the system that provided him with luxury and money. And then there was Sally Hemings. Hemings was a slave at Monticello, and it is now abundantly clear that she was the mother of at least 6 of Jefferson's children. She was also his late wife's half-sister, the result of years of servitude that were entangled with rape, compulsion, and muddled lineages. The relationship between Jefferson and Hemings is still one of the most talked about and unsettling parts of his life. She lacked the legal capacity to consent, and their children were born into bondage. Though Jefferson later freed some of them through his will, Monticello was more than just a house. It was a mirror reflecting the hypocrisy, the rationalization, and the cold compartmentalization that allowed a man of ideals to live in a system of oppression. Jefferson, the philosopher, never resolved the contradiction. He simply lived with it behind a politician and plantation owner. Jefferson had the soul of a scientist. He didn't just tinker with ideas. He dissected, observed, measured, and if something in the natural world could be cataloged, he wanted it in his notebooks. He called science his passion, and it wasn't a hollow claim. His collection contained books on meteorology, astronomy, agriculture, anatomy, and daily weather observations. He also experimented with crops, built mechanical devices, and spoke with scientists around Europe. One of his lifelong concerns was observation, proof, and what could be seen and understood. He was not a man of faith in the conventional sense. Megalonyx, after studying fossils sent to him from a Virginia cave. Jefferson, a giant prehistoric sloth named after him, felt that America needed to demonstrate that its flora and fauna were as magnificent as those of Europe, both politically and biologically. He even got into an odd scientific dispute with French naturalist Buffon, who said that American animals were weaker and smaller than their European cousins. Jefferson responded by sending him the bones of massive Macedine's message received Jefferson's. Interest in science was also deeply tied to the American frontier when he commissioned the Louis and Clark expedition. It wasn't just for maps and diplomacy. He wanted data, notes on plants, animals, minerals, geography, and indigenous peoples. P. Gave the explorers detailed instructions. Record everything, return with specimens, bring the unknown into the light. He envisioned the frontier not as a laboratory, one where American knowledge would grow alongside its territory. But even in this, Jefferson's curiosity was entangled with blind spots. His fascination with Native American culture existed, alongside policies that enabled their displacement. He romanticized their societies in his writings while supporting land acquisition that led to their erasure. Jefferson also brought his experimental mindset into architecture and agriculture. He designed his own plow. He tinkered with crop rotation methods. For Jefferson, Monticello was a living experiment that was half plantation and half scientific estate. He believed that knowledge was a civic virtue, and that a republic could not exist without educated citizens who were based on reason and inquiry. However, as was the case with many aspects of his life, his quest for truth frequently came with unsettling contradictions. Though organized religion was a hazardous instrument that was all too frequently used to legitimize oppression, Thomas Jefferson didn't despise religion. Rather, he didn't trust it. He once wrote, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." Additionally, he included doctrine, clergy, and creeds in his definition of tyranny. Jefferson was a follower of enlightened deism, which holds that God created the laws of nature and then stepped back to let the universe run its course without miracles, burning bushes, or the slow rotation of the planets. He admired Jesus, but not as a divine being. Jefferson did not believe in God in the sense that he interfered in everyday affairs or split the seas on command. Jefferson viewed him as a moral philosopher who preached humility, compassion, and peace, but years of church politics twisted his teachings. Jefferson had little time for the resurrection because he revered the Sermon on the Mount. In fact, he was so devoted to this idea that he literally used a razor and glue to create his own Bible. Jefferson physically removed any allusions to miracles, divinity, and supernatural occurrences from the New Testament. His critics were appalled. The word godless was frequently thrown at him, particularly during the bitter presidential campaigns of the early 1800s. Some even warned that Jefferson's election would result in Bibles being burned and churches being converted into stables, but none of that materialized. What was left was a small volume of moral teachings that had been stripped of magic, but rich in ethical instruction. He called it the life and morals of Jesus of Nazareth. Jefferson was a strong supporter of religious freedom and established the idea of church-state separation in the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. one of only 3 accomplishments he wanted to be mentioned on his headstone. Faith was not the enemy unquestioned. Faith was in the quiet of Monticello, beneath the ticking of clocks and the scratch of quills. Jefferson prayed not to a god of thunder, but to treason itself. By the time Thomas Jefferson retired from public life, he was exhausted, politically bruised, financially ruined, and increasingly haunted by the contradictions that had shadowed his legacy. He withdrew to Monticello, his beloved mountaintop estate, where he hoped to spend his final years in quiet, reflection, farming, reading, and letter writing. But Jefferson's version of retirement was anything but idle. He founded the University of Virginia, designing its campus himself, right down to the neoclassical columns and the shape of the lecture halls. He wanted it to be a secular temple of reason, a place where students could study freely without interference from church or crown. No religious tests, no dogma, just inquiry. He called the university his last act of usefulness, and it was. But perhaps the most surprising chapter of Jefferson's twilight years came in the form of an old rival, John Adams. The two had once been friends, collaborators in the fight for independence, fellow signers of the Declaration. But over time, politics tore them apart. Jefferson became the standard bearer of the Democratic Republicans for more than 10 years. Adams led the Federalists. Their rivalry grew sour. Their correspondence ceased. Their friendship died quietly in the ashes of election season. However, in 1812, a mutual friend, Dr. Benjamin Rush, urged them to make amends. Jefferson wrote a tentative letter to which Adams replied, starting one of the most amazing correspondences in American history. Over the course of the following 14 years, they exchanged more than 150 letters, not of apology, but of philosophy, politics, and theology. Like two elderly warriors comparing wounds, science, memory, and aging spoke of the revolution. They didn't always agree. In fact, they almost ever did, but they listened. And their letters became evidence that rational discourse could bridge even the most profound divides. Jefferson's health deteriorated, his debts increased, and he started selling off parts of his library and Monticello, which was always more of a dream than a practical estate. However, in his last years, he found a rare peace and an old friend who had once been lost to politics became a companion in thought. Together, they had contributed to the creation of a nation, and now, as their lives came to an end, they were creating something more peaceful. On the morning of July 4th, 1826, Thomas Jefferson lay in his bed at Monticello, too weak to get out of bed, too proud to grumble. He was 83 years old, frail, deeply in debt, and drifting in and out of consciousness. His family had gathered quietly around him, outside the country he helped create was celebrating its 50th anniversary. Jefferson had always been captivated by the timing of symbols, and now, as parades started to form in Virginia and fireworks exploded in far-off cities, history appeared to be plotting in silence. According to those at his bedside, Jefferson's breathing slowed and his thoughts wandered. He stirred slightly and asked one last question before closing his eyes once more. He passed away a few hours later, shortly after noon. But the story doesn't end there, continues hundreds of miles away in Quincy, Massachusetts. In addition to rekindling their correspondence, John Adams, Jefferson's old friend, enemy, and friend again, was also dying. The two men had been walking parallel paths for almost 50 years, constantly circling each other. Adams, who was slipping in and out of lucidity, is said to have said his last words the same day that Thomas Jefferson survived. He was unaware that Jefferson had already passed away 5 hours prior, on July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the country they had helped create. Two of America's founding fathers, two presidents, and two signers of the Declaration of Independence had both died. The news of the twin deaths spread like wildfire, and newspapers framed it as divine providence, as if the founders had waited to ensure that the Republic had survived for 50 years before letting go. Jefferson was buried on his favorite mountaintop, beneath a simple obelisk that he had designed himself. At his request, the inscription read, "Author of the Declaration of American Independence of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom and Father of the University of Virginia." In death, Jefferson remained a man of ideas, imperfect, clever, inconsistent, and remarkable, and he wished to be remembered for his principles rather than his power. Thomas Jefferson is regarded by some as the greatest of the founding fathers because he left behind a discussion that has lasted for over 2 centuries, in addition to monuments, papers, and lofty ideals. The president and philosopher who founded America and envisioned a country founded on liberty for others is a symbol of hypocrisy. He advocated equality while possessing human beings. Both points of view are accurate, but no one provides a whole picture for decades. But myths don't last forever. In recent decades, historians and the general public have focused more on the parts that were once hidden, such as the enslaved people at Monticello and his lifelong refusal to free the majority of them. Jefferson was literally and figuratively cast in marble, and his words were carved into memorial walls. Schoolchildren recited his sentences. Political leaders quoted him like scripture, and he became a sort of secular prophet. It is now well acknowledged that Jefferson, who authored powerful statements about human rights, also sold individuals to pay off his debts. His relationship with Sally Hemings was one of uneven power, compounded by bondage and consent that could never genuinely exist. The thinker who supported religious freedom cut up his own Bible to remove the parts he couldn't accept. And the man who envisioned an empire of liberty helped spread slavery across the American frontier. He was possibly America's first great contradiction, but contradiction doesn't imply lack of greatness. Rather, it means complexity. Jefferson was a man who used his pen to shape the world, but was unable to completely change himself. He was progressive in theory, cautious in practice, bold in philosophy, but hesitant in action. He was also a master of elegant language, which occasionally concealed harsh realities. Today, Monticello provides a more complete account. The house and the names of the enslaved laborers who constructed it are still there. But school textbooks now place Jefferson next to both his successes and his failures, and the nation he helped found is still struggling with the promises he made and the realities he lived. Jefferson's secret life was never truly hidden. If one looked closely, it was always in plain sight. And perhaps that is the lesson. A country founded on values must never cease challenging the men who wrote them, not to disregard them, but to fully comprehend and improve upon them.